Welcome to Heartfelt Stories. Today's story follows Jessica, a single mother doing everything she can to provide a better life for her daughter. Emma. Little did she know that her new job would lead her to cross paths with Alexander Rivers, a reclusive billionaire. What started as a simple job of caring for his wounds would soon uncover the hidden depths of both their lives. Stick around and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more emotional stories. Jessica had never imagined that her life would turn out this way. As she adjusted her daughter Emma's scarf, the cold wind biting at her cheeks, she kissed her forehead, hurrying, leading her to the bus stop. Emma, a 6-year-old with bright eyes, clutched her lunchbox, completely unaware of the anxiety that lingered in her mother's heart. The morning was a blur of responsibilities: school drop-offs, job shifts, bills that never seemed to stop piling up for Jessica. Life felt like a balancing act, one where every day was a challenge to keep things from falling apart. It hadn't always been like this. When Emma was still a little flutter in her womb, Jessica's world had been turned upside down. Her boyfriend, the man she thought she would build a life with, walked away without so much as a second thought, leaving her to raise their daughter alone. Since that day, Jessica had been working tirelessly to give Emma the best life she could. Even if it meant sacrificing everything else, that day, however, felt different. Jessica was clutching a neatly folded slip of paper, the address to her new job. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even close to what she had dreamed of. But it paid better than her last job at the diner, and that was enough. The job was to care for a man's wounds, something she had no experience in. But the agency assured her that the client needed someone trustworthy and gentle. It was enough to get by. When the taxi dropped her off at the gates of the mansion, Jessica's breath caught in her throat. The place looked like something straight out of a movie: sprawling lawns, ivy-draped walls, and imposing double doors. She hesitated, feeling out of place in her worn coat and scuffed boots. But Margaret Collins, the stern-looking housekeeper, opened the door and ushered her inside. "Mr. Rivers is upstairs. Out. He doesn't like to be kept waiting," she said curtly. Jessica's heart raced as she made her way up the grand staircase. Alexander Rivers, the reclusive billionaire, was known for his success in business and his charm. But after a mysterious accident 2 years ago, he had disappeared from the public. Now, he was a shadow of the man he once was, rarely seen in public and rarely interacting with anyone. When she stepped into the room, Jessica caught her first glimpse of him. Alexander was sitting at the edge of a high-backed chair, bathed in sunlight. His figure was tall, broad-shouldered, and commanding, but there was a hesitation in his posture. His face was partially obscured by shadows. The scar that ran down his cheek was a stark reminder of the accident he had endured. His left hand rested awkwardly on a cane. "Are you the nurse?" Alexander's voice was low, edged with doubt. "I'm Jessica," she replied, forcing her voice to stay steady. "The agency sent me." For a moment, Alexander studied her with piercing eyes, as though searching for any judgment in her expression. But she held his gaze, refusing to flinch, meeting it with quiet determination. Finally, he spoke again, his expression softening. "Very well," he said, his tone surprisingly neutral. "Let's get started." The first few days were uncomfortable for Jessica. The work was quiet, with little conversation between her and Alexander. He rarely spoke unless necessary, and when he did, his responses were short and businesslike. Jessica did her best to respect his space, sensing the discomfort that seemed to radiate from him. It wasn't just the scars on his face, or the stiffness in his movements. There was something deeper, an invisible weight he carried. But Jessica remained focused on her task, knowing that for now, this was all she could offer. One afternoon, while adjusting a bandage on Alexander's hand, the sound of Emma's laughter echoed faintly from the courtyard. Jessica froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had brought Emma with her that day, unable to find a sitter, and had left her with Margaret. Alexander raised an eyebrow at the sound. "Your daughter?" he asked, breaking the silence. "Yes," Jessica replied, her voice tinged with apprehension. "Her name's Emma." To her surprise, Alexander didn't seem annoyed. Instead, he seemed intrigued. "How old is she?" "She's 6, Jessica replied, pausing in her work. "She's the reason I'm here. Everything I do is for her." For the first time, Alexander looked at her not as an employee, but as a person. There was something in his eyes, a flicker of understanding, perhaps even admiration, as the days passed. Jessica found herself becoming more comfortable in her new role. Even though the awkwardness between her and Alexander Rivers never fully disappeared, the mansion, with its cold, imposing grandeur, felt increasingly like a world apart from her. Humble life with Emma. Yet it was within these walls that she found a growing sense of purpose. Every morning she left Emma at school and hurried to the Rivers estate where her work would begin. It was a routine that, despite its monotony, gave her a sense of stability she hadn't had in years. But things were shifting. At first, Alexander barely spoke to her, his communication limited to brief, business-like instructions. He would sit in his chair, allowing Jessica to tend to his wounds without saying much. The scar on his face, a sharp reminder of the accident that had changed everything for him, remained a visible barrier between them. It wasn't just the physical scars. There was an emotional wall built around him, as though he was terrified of being seen as vulnerable. Yet as the days went by, Jessica started noticing small changes. His shoulders would relax when she entered the room, and his responses began to soften. The hard, sharp edges of his words gave way to dry humor and occasional moments of shared laughter. One chilly afternoon, as Jessica was preparing to leave, she found Alexander staring out the window, lost in thought. She hesitated, unsure whether to disturb him, but the silence felt too heavy to ignore. "Mr. Rivers," she said softly, breaking the quiet. He turned his head, his gaze meeting hers, but there was a hesitation in his eyes. "Your injuries don't define you," Jessica said gently, her voice steady despite the rush of emotion she could feel building up inside her. Alexander flinched slightly, his jaw tightening. "It's easy for you to say," he muttered bitterly. "You don't know what it's like to be reduced to this." She didn't flinch under his words. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice unwavering. "I don't," she admitted, "but I do know what it's like to feel abandoned, to feel like you're not enough." She paused, watching his reaction carefully. "And I know that doesn't have to be the end of your story." For a moment, Alexander seemed lost in thought. There was a flicker of something in his eyes, something raw, and for the first time he didn't retreat from it. He didn't hide behind the mask he had been wearing for so long. The next morning, Alexander surprised her as she entered the room to tend to him. He spoke for the first time without being prompted. "Jessica," he said, his voice still hesitant but warmer, "you were right yesterday." She looked up at him, surprised. "About what?" "About not letting my injuries define me," he said, his gaze far away as he spoke. "I've spent so much time hiding from the world, forgot that there's still a life to be lived." The shift in their relationship didn't happen overnight, but it was unmistakable. Slowly, as the weeks went by, Alexander began to open up to her in ways she never expected. He started sharing pieces of his past, his childhood, the family he had lost, the things that haunted him. Sometimes he would even crack a dry joke, his usual aloofness momentarily slipping away. One afternoon, as the autumn air filled the room, Alexander invited Emma to join them in the library. Jessica had brought her daughter with her that day, and she had been nervously awaiting Emma's first meeting with Alexander. To Jessica's surprise, Alexander seemed eager to have her there. They set up a small art station for Emma, who immediately took to the task, her bright eyes lighting up as she dipped her brush into the paint. Alexander helped Emma paint a picture of a giraffe, his usual stiffness slowly melting away as he became absorbed in the simple joy of helping Emma create something. Laughter filled the room as Emma giggled at Alexander's clumsy attempt to paint a flower, the brushstrokes far from perfect. "Look, Mr. Rivers made a silly flower," Emma exclaimed, holding up the painting proudly. Alexander raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. "It's a modern interpretation," he said with mock seriousness, earning a smile from Jessica. That moment, Jessica saw something in Alexander that she hadn't noticed before, a vulnerability. Yes, but also a sense of connection, a glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior. For the first time, he wasn't just a broken billionaire. He was a man capable of joy, of laughter, connecting with another person. Later that evening, as Emma had fallen asleep, Jessica found herself walking outside where she spotted Alexander. Standing in the garden, the moonlight bathed his features, and for the first time, she saw him not just as the man with scars, but as someone who had lived through pain, someone who carried his own burdens, but was beginning to let go of them. "Thank you," Alexander said quietly, breaking the silence. "For what?" Jessica asked, stepping closer to him. "For treating me like a person," he replied, his voice full of sincerity. She smiled, feeling her heart swell with emotion.
"You're welcome,"
she said, her voice soft but steady. "You're not just a project, Mr. Rivers. You're you." And in that moment, something shifted between them. The barrier that had existed for so long seemed to dissolve, leaving behind a quiet connection that neither of them could quite name. As Jessica walked back inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something profound, something that would change the course of both their lives. But she wasn't sure yet what that change would mean. The following weeks passed in a quiet rhythm. As Jessica's mornings began, with the familiar school drop-offs followed by hours spent tending to Alexander, Rivers's recovery at the Rivers estate. What had once been an arrangement filled with tension and awkwardness was now a partnership. Though unspoken, Jessica found herself looking forward to the moments they shared in the quiet of the mansion. Their bond, fragile yet undeniable, was growing stronger each day. But as with any journey, obstacles lay ahead. One afternoon, Jessica was caught off guard when she received a letter. It was from Emma's father, Michael Thompson, the man who had walked out on them years ago, leaving Jessica to raise their daughter on her own. She had worked so hard to build a life for herself and Emma, and now, with just a few written words, everything felt uncertain once more. The letter was simple but loaded with emotion. Michael wanted to meet Emma, to make things right. Jessica felt the tremor of old wounds reopening. Part of her was afraid that allowing Emma to meet Michael would only bring more hurt. But another part of her couldn't deny that Emma deserved the chance to know her father, even if it meant exposing her to the pain Jessica had long buried. When Alexander saw the letter, his jaw clenched with frustration. "What are you going to do?" he asked, his voice low. "I don't know," Jessica admitted, her heart heavy. "I want to protect Emma, but I also don't want to stand in the way if this is something she needs." Alexander placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here. You don't have to face this alone." Those words, simple yet profound, echoed in Jessica's mind as she made her decision. She arranged a meeting with Michael. At a small cafe in the city, Emma was nervous, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation. Jessica could feel the weight of it all, but she wasn't sure what was more daunting, facing Michael, or allowing her heart to acknowledge the unspoken connection that had blossomed between her and Alexander. The meeting was tense at first. Michael looked older, wearier than she remembered. He sat at a corner table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, his gaze darting between Jessica and Emma, who stood by her side, clutching her hand tightly. Michael said awkwardly, standing up when they approached. "You must be Emma." Emma studied him cautiously, her wide eyes searching his face. "Hi," she said softly, unsure of who he was, but sensing the importance of this moment. Michael crouched down to her level, a small, hesitant smile on his face. "You've grown so much. You look just like your mom." The tension was palpable, but slowly, Emma's curiosity began to shine through. She asked Michael questions about his favorite color, his favorite animal, and whether he liked ice cream as much as she did. Jessica watched, her heart aching but also feeling a sense of relief that Emma was opening up in her own way. But as the conversation continued, Michael's regret became clear. "I made a mistake," he admitted quietly, his voice filled with remorse. "A big one. But I want to fix it now, if you let me." For the first time, Jessica saw something in Michael. Genuine regret. But there was still something in her that couldn't forget the pain he had caused her. The way he had walked away when they needed him the most. Still, she couldn't deny the importance of this moment for Emma, even if it meant confronting her own fears. As they left the cafe, The awkwardness of the meeting lingered, but Emma seemed lighter, her laughter filling the air as she skipped ahead, chatting with Alexander. It was clear that Emma had found comfort in the presence of the man who had become so much more than just her mother's employer. Jessica walked alongside Alexander, her heart in turmoil. She wasn't sure what the future held, but she knew that she wasn't alone anymore. "Jessica," Alexander said softly, breaking the silence. "Did I?" Jessica asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I feel like I'm just making it up as I go." Alexander stopped walking and turned to face her. His expression was soft, his eyes filled with understanding. "You're doing more than making it up. You're giving Emma a chance to know her father, even. When it's hard for you, that takes strength." The sincerity in his voice caught Jessica off guard, and for a moment she felt her defenses crumble. She had spent so long building walls to protect herself. But here was Alexander offering her something she hadn't realized she needed: support, understanding, and the willingness to stand by her side, no matter the challenges they faced. Later, that evening, as Jessica tucked Emma into bed, her daughter looked up at her with wide, thoughtful eyes. "Mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with innocence. "Do you think Daddy will stay this time?" Jessica's heart twisted at the question. She forced a smile, brushing her daughter's hair from her face. "I hope so, sweetheart. But no matter what happens, you'll always have me and Mr. Alexander." A weight seemed to lift off her shoulders as she said those words. She had spent so long believing that she had to do it all on her own, but now she knew that wasn't the case. Alexander had become part of their lives, and in his own way, he was helping them heal. The walls she had built were slowly crumbling, piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, Jessica came to understand that life wasn't about perfection. It was about accepting the misanthropes, the flaws, the mistakes, and the things that couldn't be controlled. Emma deserved to know her father, and Jessica deserved to have someone who saw her not just as a mother or a caregiver, but as a person worthy of love and support. Alexander, too, was learning to embrace his imperfections. Scars he wore, both visible and invisible, didn't define him. It was his heart, his kindness, and his willingness to open up that mattered most. In the end, Jessica, Emma, and Alexander found something even more precious than healing. They found a new beginning. They weren't perfect, but they were together, and that was enough. Life often doesn't go according to plan, and sometimes we must confront the painful parts of our past to move forward. But in those moments of vulnerability, we learn the true meaning of strength, support, and the power of connection. What matters most is not the scars we carry, but the people who help us heal and the love we share, even through the messiahnesses of life. Thank you for joining us at Heartfelt Stories. We hope today's story touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories that inspire hope, love, and the fight for justice. We'd love to hear where you're watching from, so feel free to share in the comments below. See you in the next story.